My name is Floyd Sears. I am a military retiree and a military veteran. I served the United States of America in the United States Air Force for 20 years from 1951 to 1971. Please allow me to tell you about the greatest swindle of all time, a broken contract with America's military retirees. This is my story, but any one of the other 1.8 million military retirees affected by this swindle could tell you the same story. As we examine this issue, think about the words fraud and swindle. Fraud is a deliberate deception for unfair or unlawful gain, a trick. To swindle is to cheat or defraud of money or property. Also think about the definition of a contract, with the most basic elements being the offer and the acceptance of the offer. In order to understand the military retiree medical care broken promise issue, it must be understood that not all veterans are the same in reference to the medical care that was promised at the end of their service to their country. Since all veterans are not the same, for this discussion, one group of veterans will be referred to as military veterans and another group of veterans as military retirees. A military veteran is a person who served in the active military, naval, or air service, and who was discharged or released therefrom under conditions other than dishonorable. A military retiree is any former member of the uniformed service who is entitled, under statute, to retired, retirement, or retainer pay. Examples include, but are not necessarily limited to, spending 20 or more years in the military, or permanent retirement by reason of physical disability. All military retirees are veterans, but not all veterans are military retirees. Think about that. Many members of the Congress, their staff members, the news media, and the American people don't realize that there is a difference between a military veteran that spends less than 20 years in the military and is discharged, and a military retiree veteran that spends 20 to 30 years in the military and retires. They don't seem to understand that medical care promises were made to both groups, but the promises are different. Military retirees were promised free medical care for themselves and their eligible dependents for life at military treatment facilities. This person is a military retiree. She spent 20 years in the military and retired. She was promised free medical care for herself and her eligible dependents at military treatment facilities. Since she is also a military veteran, she can get medical care at a VA hospital or clinic. However, she cannot get medical care for her eligible dependents at a VA hospital or clinic. Military veterans were promised medical care at a VA hospital or clinic, basically for service-connected disabilities or medical conditions. This person is a military veteran. He spent 4 years in the military and was discharged. He was promised medical care at a VA hospital or clinic. Some people get confused concerning this discussion, since a distinction is made between the military veteran and the military retiree. This distinction is necessary to avoid the confusion that always results when military retiree issues are being discussed, and the Congress responds by talking about veterans issues instead of military retiree issues. The military retiree medical care broken promise issue is not a military veterans issue. It is a military retiree issue. In the United States, the veterans community numbers about 26.5 million. The military retirees, a subset of the veterans community, numbers about 1.8 million. In fairness to all concerned, the Congress, congressional staff members, the news media, the American people, all veterans, and all veterans service organizations, it must be understood that there is a difference between the military retiree and the military veteran in reference to the medical care that was promised after service to their country. First, let me tell you about the contractual offer. From World War II to the early 1990s, agents of the United States government made this offer. Serve for 20 years in the military and retire, and you will receive full free medical care for yourself and your eligible dependents at military treatment facilities for as long as you and your eligible dependents live. Events have proven that this promise was the greatest gimmick, promotional stratagem, and swindle of all time, and the active duty military believed it as they were supposed to. It is important to note that this promise did not indicate that a military retiree would have to use and pay for a medical care plan such as Medicare and a Medicare supplement when he or she reached age 65. It did not indicate that a military retiree would have to use and make co-payments to an HMO-type medical care plan such as TRICARE. And it did not indicate that the promise applied to non-military retiree veterans. One had to serve for at least 20 years and retire in order to be eligible for the promised medical care. This promise was made initially by military recruiters, then over a 20 to 30-year period by basic training instructors, line-level supervisors, first sergeants, commanding officers, and reenlistment counselors, all agents of the United States government, as directed by publications received from the highest level of the military hierarchy. The military hierarchy authorized the making of the promise because it was the law. Prior to 7 June 1956, the U.S. Code stated, under joint regulations to be prescribed by the administering secretaries, a member or former member of a uniformed service who is entitled to retired or retainer pay or equivalent pay shall, upon request, be given medical and dental care in any facility of any uniformed service. The promise was made to encourage the trained and experienced military personnel to remain in the military. The prime reason for making the promise was to save the American taxpayers billions of dollars by not having to train replacements every 2 to 4 years. It was all about money. On 7 June 1956, Congress changed the U.S. Code as follows. Under joint regulations to be prescribed by the administering secretaries, a member or former member of a uniformed service who is entitled to retired or retainer pay or equivalent pay may, upon request, be given medical and dental care in any facility of any uniformed service, subject to the availability of space and facilities and the capabilities of the medical and dental staff. Congress altered the U.S. Code to change the word shall to may, added the words subject to the availability of space and facilities and the capabilities of the medical and dental staff, and the stage was set for military base closures, the breaking of the medical care promise, and the greatest swindle of all time. There was no fanfare or warning given to the active duty military concerning this major change to the law that would drastically affect their lives later in retirement, and the military establishment continued to make the same medical care promise. The medical care promise was still being made as late as 1991. These words were extracted from an Army recruiting poster. Superb health care. Health care is provided to you and your family members while you are in the Army and for the rest of your life if you serve a minimum of 20 years of federal service to earn your retirement. Take a close look at this health care promise that was being made as late as 1991. Not only does it promise health care, but it promises superb health care. It clearly indicates that health care is promised to you, the service member, and also to your family members while in the Army and for the rest of your life if you earn retirement. This poster was printed in the United States government printing office. In the late 1980s, Congress and the Department of Defense started the process of closing military bases and medical facilities where the medical care promise was supposed to be kept. As a result, the space, facilities, and the capabilities of the medical staff were substantially reduced. The military health care system had to change, and TRICARE was born. In 1995, TRICARE came to Keesler Air Force Base, where I had been receiving medical care since 1961. I turned 65, was not eligible to enroll in TRICARE Prime, had to leave Keesler Air Force Base, go on Medicare, pay for Medicare Part B and a Medicare supplement, and the medical care promise was broken for the author of this webpage and millions like him that were over 65. The medical care promise was also broken for millions of other military retirees, including those under age 65, because they had to start paying for their medical care. The government reneged on their promise. It was all about money when the promise was made, and it's all about money now. It's the greatest swindle of all time. It's a broken contract with America's military retirees. I've told you about the offer. Now let me tell you about the acceptance of the offer. From 1951 to 1971, Floyd Sears and millions like him accepted the offer, that is, believed the promise, and took a similar oath. I do solemnly swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America, that I will serve honestly and faithfully against all their enemies whomsoever, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I made a promise, and I kept my promise. I would have died if necessary to keep my promise. The fact is, I had no choice. I went where I was supposed to go, no matter what the hardship. I did what I was ordered to do, with no choice in the matter, and I obeyed orders without question. Military personnel must believe what they're told when it comes from an official source. They have no choice. It's required by military law. I had to believe what I was being told. I had to believe the medical care promise. The military person is trained from day one to trust their leaders and believe what they're being told. In the military, believing what one is told is the first step in obeying orders. If a military person is told that they must kill the enemy in combat and is also told that if they serve for 20 years in the military and retire, they will receive free medical care for themselves and their eligible dependents at military treatment facilities for as long as they and their eligible dependents live, should they believe the one thing they're told and disbelieve the other? I trusted and respected my military and elected leaders. I believed what I was told, and I believed what I was promised. They, my leaders, could and did depend on me. I never let them down. I never reneged on my promise. Now, let me tell you about the lawsuit seeking justice. In July 1996, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of William O. Chisholm and Robert L. Rinley by Colonel retired George E. Day of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, seeking monetary damages in the Federal District Court of Pensacola, Florida, charging age discrimination, Fifth Amendment taking of property, and breach of contract. In June of 1997, the District Court dismissed the plaintiff's claim of age discrimination, but agreed to hear further arguments on their Fifth Amendment taking of property and breach of contract theories. In August 1998, the District Court denied plaintiff's entire petition. In December 1998, the plaintiffs appealed to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in Washington, D.C. In March 2000, the federal court heard oral arguments of both parties. In February 2001, a three-judge panel of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Washington, D.C., overturned the Pensacola, Florida Federal District Court's decision and finds that military retirees who entered service before 7 June 1956 had been promised free lifetime health care in return for a career of military service and were due compensation of up to $10,000 each for the government's failure to live up to that promise. This decision was appealed by the United States government. In June 2001, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Washington, D.C., agrees to a rehearing before the full court. On 6 March 2002, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Washington, D.C., heard oral arguments from both sides in the case. On 18 November 2002, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Washington, D.C., made a ruling which affirmed the U.S. government's position that military retirees have no legal standing to receive the medical care promised. This decision was appealed by the plaintiffs. On 24 January 2003, a petition was filed in the Supreme Court of the United States. On 2 June 2003, the Supreme Court refuses to hear the case. You be the judge. Did justice prevail? The author of this webpage is somewhat confused concerning the court's decision. Think about this. You agree to make 20 payments to purchase an automobile. The dealer receives and makes full use of your 20 payments. Now the car is yours, right? Wrong. The dealer says you cannot have the car because the salesman who sold it to you was not authorized to make the contract. You say that this is ridiculous, and of course you're right, because you had a contract. There was an offer and an acceptance of the offer, and you fulfilled your part of the contract. What if you're made this offer? Serve for 20 years in the military and retire, and you will receive free medical care for yourself and your eligible dependents at military treatment facilities for as long as you and your eligible dependents live, and you accept. Is that a contract? Yes, it is. But beware. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit has said in the William O. Chisholm and Robert L. Riley versus United States case, we cannot readily imagine more sympathetic plaintiffs than the retired officers of the World War II and Korean War era involved in this case. They served their country for at least 20 years with the understanding that when they retired, they and their dependents would receive full, free health care for life. The promise of such health care was made in good faith and relied upon. Again, however, because no authority existed to make such promises in the first place, and because Congress has never ratified or acquiesced to this promise, we have no alternative but to uphold the judgment against the retiree's breach of contract claim. So, we have the military hierarchy making a promise from the early 1940s to the early 1990s they were not authorized to make, and we have the greatest swindle of all time, a broken contract with America's military retirees. In their 18 November 2002 ruling, the court said that perhaps Congress will consider using its legal power to address the moral claims raised by Chisholm and Riley on their own behalf and indirectly for other affected retirees. The Congress claims that the United States of America cannot afford to keep the medical care promises made by the military, and we have a standoff. The Congress will not comply with the court's recommendation. In closing, I will say again, it was all about money when the promise was made, and it's all about money now. It's the greatest swindle of all time. It's a broken contract with America's military retirees. Thank you for listening to this story.